Yeah, I'm Dr. Joel Koretko. I am a assistant professor of biblical studies at Northwest Seminary and College. I'm also an adjunct professor of biblical studies at Axe Seminaries and Trinity Western University.
So just kind of setting the stage, I did a stream, I guess it was 3 or 4 weeks ago now, in which I responded directly to an appearance that Ammon Hillman made on the Danny Jones podcast, where he said a whole bunch of wild things. One of which was that the Bible, the Old Testament, was originally written in Greek and then back translated into Hebrew.
We are going to be working through like definitive examples to show you that the Septuagint is a translation. So my task here today that I have taken on happily is to show you actual evidence that demonstrates that the Septuagint is a translation from a Hebrew text. So a lot of people are saying like, oh, well, what are they have no, how anyone going to know this? We can actually demonstrate this with data. And so that's what we're going to do. It is relatively agreed upon in Septuagint studies that the Pentateuch, the Torah, was translated in the 3rd century, so the 200s BCE. We have various ways of coming to that conclusion. Not only early manuscript evidence, so Deuteronomy we find in papyri around like 180-ish BC, so we know it's happened before that. We have certain Greek Jewish authors writing and citing the Septuagint, which they appear to be also at the kind of the beginning of the 2nd century. And then we have the internal translation data as well, so we can see things within the text itself, both linguistically, lexicographically. We can see that certain words were used in the 3rd century, and then if you do a synthesis of the data, you can see that those words dropped out by the 2nd century BCE. And so we can tell through a host of different kind of data points that the Septuagint was in fact the Torah. That is, the first 5 books was translated in the 3rd century BCE. When in the 3rd century is actually contested, and even someone as great as the late Jim Aitken, one of the biggest Septuagint scholars of all time, who passed away tragically last year, he would say potentially the very beginning of the 2nd century, but that's a bit of an outlier opinion.
But even Ammon, he agrees that this Greek text, the Septuagint that we have, is around this time period. The question is if there was something before that, or if this was just like the original text, original language.
Yes, that's the question we're answering today, and that I've been employed to answer specifically. Is the Septuagint a translation, or and how do we know? Okay, so Ammon is making some big claims. He's pulling out the authority card, and he's saying, "I read Greek texts. I can scientifically, linguistically determine when texts are dated based on their literary style." And he's saying that if you read a bunch of Greek texts, you're able to determine Greek literary style. That's what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a bad statement. That's actually a good statement. It's actually helpful to know what kind of Greek we are encountering when we read the Septuagint. So now I'll kind of branch into my specialty here. So Ammon is saying, and he actually says, that the Greek of the Septuagint is Hellenistic. That is, it's 3rd century and beyond. He is correct. That's right. It is a 3rd century type of Greek that we're seeing. We have many different ways of determining that. There are many scholars right now in Septuagint studies and beyond working on what we call post-classical Greek, which is the Greek of the time after the classical period. So basically 300 BC onwards, because Greek changes, language develops. But where his statement goes awry is in his claim that the literary style of the LXX, the Septuagint, is purely compositional Hellenistic Greek. So compositional being if I sit down and I just start writing, if I'm a Greek person, I just start writing in Greek, the way in which you would normally write based on the conventions of the time, both classical and post-classical. How do you write Greek? Just naturally. Ammon seems to claim that the language represents normal day-to-day Greek that you'd encounter in regular writing or conversation. But I don't think Ammon has taken the time to investigate the details of the language of the Septuagint. So what I'm saying is he's claiming, and this is why I started to get frustrated, I can tell you literary style. And when I read the Septuagint, I know the literary style. I don't think he's right. I think he actually doesn't know the literary style. And that's a big claim, I recognize, but I don't think he's picking up on it because he hasn't done a close reading of the text. the literary style of the Septuagint, while being comprehensible and understandable Greek, it is translation Greek. We can look at the Septuagint and demonstrate that it is definitely translated from Hebrew. And now I'm wondering if I can bring an example in now. Do you guys care? Is
Yeah,
that
please
good?
do.
Can I start bringing some examples in so we can really start putting some flesh on these bones? Okay, I'm going to start with an easy example, like a really easy one, and we'll get more complex kind of as we work along through the videos.
Awkward.
But I'm going to give you an example here and just show you an easy one where where you can see this is translated from Hebrew. So Genesis 13:14, and Adonai said to Abraham after Lot had separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look to the place where you are, to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west." The west there is Vayama, that is toward the sea. That's how you say west when you're writing in Hebrew. In Greek, it says, "And God said to Abraham after Lot departed from him, lift up your eyes, look from the place which you are now towards the north, to the south, to the east, not to the west." It says thalasan, to the sea. Now you might be saying, it's like, well, what's going on? What's going on there? Because thalassa, this word sea in Greek, Ammon knows this. Okay, Ammon knows this. Go to a lexicon, that is a dictionary that scholars use. Look up the word sea. Does it mean west in common Greek speech? Does it ever get used to refer to west? Is it a term that they use for the west? It is not. It's not in there. Go look in the most modern or any lexicon. It's not there because it's clearly just representing what we see in the Hebrew, which is toward the sea. So in Hebrew, west is sea because you're looking towards the Mediterranean in the west. And the Greek translator just goes with the literal Hebrew term they're seeing. They're seeing the word sea, and so they go, okay, well, let's put sea in the translation, which is not idiomatic Greek. It's not the way that you say west in Greek. And so that's a really easy one example where we can start looking and going, oh, obviously they're looking at a Hebrew text when this translation or when this Greek text is being made, because thalasan is not how you would say this in Greek. So the literary style, to use Ammon's own phraseology, shows us this is translation Greek. This is from a Semitic source text. There's one example. Another proof of this in the Septuagint that we could show that, we can tell, hey, this is a different language, a different system. I'm telling you about systems of languages. I can show you that in the text again. And so can I give another example, guys? Yeah, we good?
Yes.
We're good. All right. So this one, this one's a little bit more complex than the last one, but I think it's actually way more convincing. So follow along. I believe the audience can do it. What I'm going to get at here is,
bright.
Oh yeah. So we can see that the Septuagint is translating from Hebrew because Hebrew phraseology pokes through in places. So different language system. These are things that just do not make sense if you were writing compositional Greek, just on your own without translating from a text. You can see the underlying Hebrew sitting underneath the Greek. And one way we see that is with relative pronouns and resumptive pronouns. Don't check out grammar terms. A relative pronoun is just like who, which, that, whom, that kind of thing. In Hebrew, things get phrased differently because the relative pronoun, asher, that's the term, doesn't give a ton of information about how that relative pronoun is functioning in the sentence. You need more information. And so the Hebrew is going to provide extra information with another pronoun, a resumptive pronoun. So don't check out again. Here, I'll give you an example in English. In English, we could say the playground in which he played. And in Hebrew, you would say, classical Hebrew, you'd say the playground which he played in it. You see the difference there? English, the playground in which he played. Hebrew, the playground which he played in it. But we wouldn't say that in English, right? We wouldn't put that in it on the end. The Hebrew has to add that final bit in it because the relative pronoun which doesn't tell us the relationship between his playing and the playground. You need that it in it to make clear what is meant. So I'll give you another example, an English example. The cat by which the mouse died. In Hebrew, you would say the cat which the mouse died by him. It's like that sounds really awkward to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
The cat by which the mouse died. Hebrew, the cat which the mouse died by him. So you add in again this pronoun on the end of this prepositional phrase. It's awkward to us, but totally normal in Hebrew. So now here's where, if you followed along, this is where it's going to touch down for you. Now, when we go to Greek, it's a lot like English in that it doesn't need that extra tagged on phrase on the end. That's unnecessary in Greek as it is in English. But we see it in the Septuagint. We see that extra bit on the end in the Septuagint. And so I'm going to give you, again, I'm going to be a novice YouTuber. I'm going to share my screen. Genesis 19:29. Again, I think this is almost definitive. This is definitive evidence. This is a translation. Genesis 19:29. So you've got the Hebrew, Ha'arim, Asher, Yashav, Bahem, Lot, the cities which Lot dwelled in. So I've given you like the colloquial English translation. Literally, the Hebrew would say the cities which he dwelled in them, Lot. But because we're translating to English, we get rid of that in them. But it says in them in the Hebrew. In the Greek, you've got Taspolis and Hes, Katoiki, and Avtes, Lot. The cities in which Lot dwelled in them. You see what happened? The cities in which Lot dwelled in them. Why does it say that in them? It says that because it's clearly just representing the Hebrew source text underneath. You do not need that in them in Greek. You could just say the cities in which Lot dwelled. Period. Just like you could in English. But because there's the Semitic source text, this Hebrew language system underneath, the translator is actually representing what they see in the Hebrew text. Yeah. This is not how you would say things in Greek. You do not need that in them on the end. And this actually crops up in the Septuagint over and over and over again. Another example I brought you, this is just a few from Numbers 13:32. And it says, and they presented the report of the land that they explored to the Israelites, saying, the land that we went through. And so I added in the it there and the in it, because in the Hebrew it has that, again, that extra pronoun, it. The land that they explored, it. The land that we went through, in it. And so when you get to Greek, you see it again. And so the translation, obviously the translator's doing some things here, but let's just focus on the pronouns. And he brought a terror to the land, which they visited it, towards the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed over, it. And again, that you don't need to say that in Greek. That you don't do that, because you could just say the land which they visited, the land which we passed over. Why does it have this extra pronoun, these pronominal phrases? Because it's clearly translating a Semitic source text. We see the Hebrew language popping through in ways that are not the way you'd speak Greek. So coming back to Ammon's claim about literary style, this is the literary style of the Septuagint. It is clearly translation Greek. You can see the Hebrew poking through.
Yes.
So if you're reading Homer, if you're reading the 4th century orators, you won't see this stuff. This is not the way that you write things in Greek, in compositional Greek. And the fact that it crops up over and over and over again in the Septuagint is showing us there's a Semitic source text, a Hebrew text underneath that the translator is translating from. Yeah, can I bring another example here of why we can tell there's a Hebrew text underneath? Because it's exactly what you're saying, which is that I would say that a lot of the translators, especially the Pentateuch, they seem to be pretty good at Greek. But even so, there are certainly times when they don't know what to do with the Hebrew text that's before them because they don't get what it means. And so what do? They just literally render a transliteration. They make the sounds of the Hebrew and put it into Greek in a word that means nothing. Like it's a literal meaningless word, but they just put it into Greek characters, what the Hebrew sounded like. If this were a compositional Greek text, why are they suddenly inserting meaningless Greek words? Why are they suddenly putting in just meaningless stuff? And so I'll show you. Again, I'll share my screen one more time here. I have an article from Emmanuel Tove, who is a giant in biblical studies, an absolute giant. And I just grabbed a screenshot of his article here. Loanwords is the article. And here you could can everybody see this? Yeah? You guys can see this?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
Maybe
zoom a little bit. So I just clipped this from his article, and he just shows us a few examples where you have a Hebrew text, and then it's rendered literally in Greek. So savek or sevek maybe, but sevek. I don't have the consonants here, the vowels here. But then he renders it with savek. So it's just the Hebrew being the sound of the Hebrew put into Greek letters, despite it actually this is not a word. Savek is not a word in Greek. You see it in Samuel as well, where this Amapheth upon the I guess the things before Amapheth. Well, Amapheth is just clearly Hamapheth or Hamaphoth or something from here, from the Hebrew, because they don't. This is not a Greek word. Same thing happens here in First Samuel. This ergav, ergaz. It's just Hebrew sounds being turned into Greek, and we see this in other places.
On that one from 1 Samuel 6:15, this is something interesting that we can see clearly, is that the Greek translator is not even getting the like he's misreading one of the consonants there, right? That the word is argaz, right? But because the Zion, in particular in a number of Second Temple scripts, looks almost identical to a vav, here he's transliterated it ergav, right, instead of
That's actually,
ergaz, because he's mistaking that last letter, which is a Zion, for a vav.
Yep, exactly. And so we see this in other places. We see it again in Genesis down here. They don't know what to do with this word, so it becomes just a transliteration. It's just the sounds, just to make sure everybody's clear. It's just the sounds of the Hebrew. And then it happened here again with Mahir, which again they're reading this probably a little bit differently consonantally, and you see it throughout the Septuagint. And so I share these examples with you because it is evident from the text data, scientifically speaking, as Ammon wants to, linguistically speaking, it is clearly a translation from a Semitic source text. Otherwise, they are speaking gibberish. They're making things up that's nonsensical Greek. So I hope that also helps to convince the audience who's here. It's quite evident. I know we haven't said this yet, but there is not a single Septuagint scholar on the planet who thinks that the Septuagint is not a translation. And I know, of course, consensus, whatever. I mean, we can all work towards pushing against consensus if they're wrong. But no one, I'm just saying, literally no one thinks this isn't a translation. And it's because of the things I'm showing you. The translation technical data, the linguistic data, this literary style. Ammon's making a lot of interesting etymological claims, but he wants to be scientific. So let's be scientific about the language. So again, I pose to you, those listening, what do we actually see in the linguistic data of the translation? And so I want to bring you two more points that I think show, again, this is not a compositional Greek piece. It's not written in Greek. It is translation Greek, is what it is. And they're really good examples, I think, that just demonstrate this. So I'll give you one here. So we have Leviticus. It's a crazy set of ritual texts and other things that people often get very confused by. Fair enough. But I just want to show you one thing right at the beginning. So in Hebrew, it says, ish, ish, man, man, mebeit Yisrael asher yishchat shor. Any man from the house of Israel who might slaughter an ox. Literally, man, from the house of Israel who might slaughter an ox. That's when you say man, it's an idiom. It's a Hebrew idiom to say like a certain person, an individual, a certain man. That is not the same in Greek. That idiom does not exist in Greek. But what you find in the Septuagint is anthropos, man, ton hion Yisrael, e ton proseluton, ton proskimenon, and himin hos an sphakse moschon. Man of the son of Israel's, or of the immigrants, or of those residing among you, textual difference there, who might slaughter a calf. When it says man, anthropos in Greek, go ahead and search all of the literary texts that Ammon said that you need to read to understand the literary style. I actually, I've done this. Just do the search. You can look on a thing called TLG, Thesaurus Lingua Graeca. Man is not a Greek idiom. It doesn't exist. Why it doesn't exist? Because this is translating from a Hebrew text. It's translating a Hebrew idiom literally. Ish is just anthropos. So it's clear that this is just a representation of the Hebrew that's underlying it. Yeah, so that's one example. Let's do another one. So this one's a little bit closer to my heart because it gets to my work in my dissertation. So I've done a lot of work in the laws in the Covenant Code, so in chapter 21 to 23 of Exodus. And later on, Kip, you'll mention in your comments to him about the infinitive absolute.
Yeah.
It's this specific kind of grammatical, syntactical structure that we find in Hebrew that doesn't exist in Greek. And that was a good place for you to go. I think that was right. This construction, it gives us a window into times when the Septuagint is using phraseology that doesn't exist, again, in classical or post-classical Greek, in order to mimic the Hebrew source text that they're translating from. And so it's where we can use the linguistic data to show that the Septuagint is translation Greek. And so this is the literary style, again. So here's an example. Makei ish vamet mot yumat. One striking a man and he dies, he shall certainly be put to death. That's the Hebrew. And the Greek is ayande pataxe tis tina ke apothane thanato thanatusto. If anyone might strike someone and he dies, by death, let him be put to death. And so what I want you to focus on here is that last bit. By death, let him be put to death. Thanato thanatusto. That's a redundant thing to say. If you put someone to death, they're dying by death, right? It's not colloquial Greek. In English, it doesn't compute in English, and it also doesn't compute in Greek as a normal way that you'd say something. We're redundant. So thanatao means put to death. You don't need to add by death right here for everyone to really see. By death. You don't need that. The translator adds this phrase by death. Why? And here's the cinch. Because in the Hebrew, you've got two of the same root. You got mot, yumat. You can the MT sound. Does everybody hear that? It's because it's the infinitive absolute. It uses the same term twice for emphasis to say it without sophistication. So it's wooden in that sense, the translation, because it's trying to represent what is underneath, which is this Hebrew text, this infinitive absolute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we can see again that the Septuagint is translating from Hebrew because it's saying something that is not normal in Greek. By death being put to death. It's not that's not normal Greek. That's translation Greek. And if you know the idioms of classical and post-classical Greek, the literary style, because I have gone through, I kid you not, every single example of the death penalty in legal texts and of all the terminology for the death penalty that exists in the classical and post-classical texts. This was my dissertation at Oxford. And I am telling you, thanato thanatusto is not a phrase that exists. It doesn't. It's not colloquial Greek. So it's not, the literary style is not a literary style. It's off. And why is it off? It's because the translator is going, I see the word, I see mot, and I see mot again. Well, let's do something that sounds similar. Thanato, you see, thanat, thanatusto, thanat. And so it's not idiomatic Greek, but it's representing the same kind of structure it's seeing in the Hebrew text underneath it. So we can tell then that the literary style is not that of compositional Greek. It is translation Greek. I've given you evidence here that this is clearly a translation document from a Semitic source text. Hopefully you followed along and that has become evident to you. If you don't agree, please show me how then you can explain the examples that I've given you. Don't jump into Ammon this, Ammon that, trail off into something else. How do you deal with the linguistic data? That's the question. I've noticed, I checked the chat a second ago, again, should never do that. But there's people saying, oh, Ammon's been studying Greek for 30 years. Great. That's excellent. That doesn't mean that he's right. You can read Greek texts for 30 years and read them poorly. You can read Greek texts for 30 years and not understand interdisciplinary studies, not understand translation studies, to not read the Septuagint closely for its actual linguistic data, the text linguistic data that we see in it. So it's really, that's just an appeal to an authority. We want data. Are we dealing with data? Don't just say he's great, he's a great Greek scholar, or I'm a great Greek, anyone. What is the data? That's what we want. So yeah, I mean that I've been trying to give you that information. I would also point you to the fact that it's very strange that suddenly we get these. If it is a Hebrew translation from Greek, that it's translated in different literary styles, different not dialects probably on term, but in different stages of the Hebrew language is what I should say. So you see classical biblical Hebrew, which is early Hebrew, and then it changes, and then it becomes late biblical Hebrew, and we see that in the actual Hebrew text. So it's weird to translate from Greek to different phases of the Hebrew language. That doesn't make any sense either. So that's just another piece of kind of meta data that you need to consider. So I've shown you these examples, and I do got to check out here that the Hebrew text interferes with typical Greek ways of speaking, and where there are examples where we see the Hebrew text come through in other ways. I gave you about 5 examples that are, you got to prove them wrong. Ammon can do a video on it if he wants. Feel free. I don't think he can. I will also add now, there are 0 indications that the Hebrew text has any interference from the Greek text. If it was a translation, you would expect interference from the translated text. We see no signs of Greek influence, 0. We don't see Greek loanwords. We don't see imitation of Greek syntax. We don't see any of it. Why? Because it is the Hebrew text that is interfering with the Greek text, not the other way around. The burden of proof lays with Ammon to show how this could be a translation from Greek. You would expect to see some signs that it was a translation from the Greek language, and not every possible sign that it is translated from a Semitic text. Those are my 2 cents for you all today.